Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Peoples here to talk about the Cold War. Let me run through the learning targets real quick. I know you don't see them on the screen, but let me just share them with you. I can describe the Cold War's impact on the United States and the world. And then the second one is I can describe how the United States changed during the Cold War. And so those two things you're going to be looking for as we talk about the Cold War, frozen in deadlock. All right. So here is a summary of what the Cold War, how it began. The Cold War dominated world events for most of the second half of the 20th century. For basically World War II until the 1980s, the Cold War was going on. This simmering and dangerous standoff featured two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Each one feared the other as an enemy bent on world domination. So the Soviet Union was accusing the United States and afraid that the United States was going to try and take over the world. And the United States was doing the same thing with the Soviet Union. They were afraid that the Soviet Union was going to take over the world. And so these two superpowers, the only two superpowers left after World War II, they get into this battle of words, of actions, but not a full-out war, which is why it's called the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union had been allies during World War II, but their friendship didn't last. After the war, the Soviet Union installed communist governments in many Eastern European countries. So the part of Germany that they controlled, they turned that into a communist government. Countries like Romania, Bulgaria, and those countries closest to the Soviet Union, they became communist countries. Pretty soon, Europe was split in two. On one side, the United States and its democratic friends in Western Europe and Canada, so like France, Britain, and those countries. And then on the other side, the Soviet Union and its communist friends in Eastern Europe. And it so divided Europe in half between the United States and the Soviet Union and their friends. Well, we talked about that. Each side looked for friendships with other countries, and they built up armies to protect themselves from the other. So the United States built up its army even more, and the Soviet Union built up its army even more. Matter of fact, nuclear weapons was the weapon of choice that both countries decided to build up. The United States obviously was the first country to have a nuclear weapon, the atomic bomb. But 4 years later, in 1949, the Soviet Union tested their first atomic bomb. And so by the 1950s, both countries, the United States and the Soviet Union, were stockpiling nuclear weapons that were many times more powerful than the ones that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And each side wanted to have more in case there happened to be a fight between the two countries. Over the next several years, the United States and the Soviet Union came very close to war, but each time they stepped back. Instead, what would happen is that these two countries would fight each other indirectly by taking part in wars in other countries, in smaller, less powerful nations. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about both of those wars. Can you name two anti-communist wars that the United States got involved in during the 20th century? We're going to talk about one of them next. The other one we'll talk about in a little bit, in about 2 or 3 weeks. That's right. One of the wars that the United States took part in at the end of, or during the Cold War, was the Korean War. The Cold War spread to those Asian nations of China and Korea. And in China, by 1949, China became established as a communist country. And so the United States was afraid that other countries in that area were going to become communist as well. And then Korea, the country of Korea after World War II, was divided at the 38th latitude line, where north of it there was a communist government and south of it was a democratic government. So if you take a look at this picture, on the picture on the left is the picture of the leader of China, the communist leader of China. And then on the right you can see Korea. You can see it's connected to China, okay, by land. They're close to Japan. And you can see the North Korea was communist and South Korea was democratic. And it divided on the 38th latitude line. Well, on June 25th of 1950, just 5 years after World War II ended, North Korea invades South Korea, claiming that Korea should be united as one country. The United States and the United Nations, a newly formed group to try and prevent world wars from happening, responded by offering support to South Korea. What that means is the United States and United Nations sent troops to South Korea to help those South Koreans fight against the North Koreans. And the United States, well, let's take a look at a map here before we get too far. That's not what I wanted to look at. This is what I want to look at. Okay, so these lines indicate the farthest advances. And so to understand the Korean War, you have to understand this. When the North Koreans first attacked South Korea, they pushed the South Koreans all the way to this red line. Then the United States and the United Nations sent troops. And those troops pushed the North Koreans all the way back to this blue line. Okay? At this point, the person in charge of the United States troops was a man that you see on the right there, Douglas MacArthur. And he wanted to go and continue into China, use atomic bombs on China, and end communism altogether. But the president at the time, Harry Truman, knew that if the United States used nuclear weapons, that the Soviet Union would also use nuclear weapons, because the Soviet Union was friends with China and North Korea. And so President Truman did not follow MacArthur's plan, and matter of fact, he even fired MacArthur because MacArthur called the president weak. And that was a big deal. It lost Harry Truman his re-election bid. And so that's all going on while this Korean War is going on. Meanwhile, the Chinese, they launched troops into Korea to help with North Korea, and they push the United States forces back to this purple line. And then it fights back and forth for the next few months as both countries try to get an advantage and take control. Okay, so let's go back here. So June 1950 is when the Korean War starts. China sends troops to North Korea, and by 1951, the United Nations forces, including the United States, drove the North Koreans and Chinese back to the 38th parallel. For the next 2 years, both China and North Korea and the United States and United States and South Korea fought back and forth over basically the same land. Because Truman fired MacArthur, it helped Dwight D Eisenhower, the man you see here, become elected president. Now, Dwight D Eisenhower, remember him from D-Day. He was the guy that planned the D-Day invasion. He is now president of the United States. And one of the things that he used to become elected was that he promised to go to Korea and get peace. So he does that. And after months and months of talking about a ceasefire, the Korean War officially ends on July 27, 1953, with a ceasefire, which means that it's not officially over. It's just they've stopped fighting. And that's where a lot of the stuff that's going on today, that's where that history comes from. It goes back to the Korean War in 1950 to 1953. Now, the Korean War, more than 130,000 Americans had been killed or wounded, and there were over 2 million Korean and Chinese casualties. The war is oftentimes called the Forgotten War because it falls in between World War II and Vietnam. Both World War II and Vietnam had devastating effects for the United States. The Korean War also had devastating effects for Americans, but it gets lost in the shuffle of the other wars. But it was definitely just as difficult and just as deadly as other wars that the United States has been a part of. So that's an example of the United States and the Soviet Union fighting each other indirectly in a smaller scale. So nuclear weapons weren't ever used, but they fought each other through Korea. Well, we're going to pause here, and I'll get you another one. The next video we'll talk about some of the Red Scare that happened here at home, the fear of communism.